They broke the oldest rule in the galaxy: never challenge humans. The hall was built to make you feel small. Cole Hargrove noticed it the moment the doors opened. The ceiling stretched up 40 meters, maybe more. He measured it the way soldiers measure things, fast, with the eyes, out of habit. The walls were pale stone, smooth and cold, with no seams and no warmth. The lighting came from somewhere high above, and it was the kind of light that made everything below it look like it was being examined. The seats for the Veth representatives were near the top, raised on wide stone platforms. The seats for Earth's delegation were at the bottom level. Below, the drainage channels cut into the floor. Cole sat down. He did not look up. There were 6 of them from Earth. Cole was the senior officer. Nora Callahan sat 2 seats to his left. Had a notepad open on her knee, pen already moving. She had been studying the Veth language for 30 years. She was the best xenolinguist Earth had ever produced. She had not been given a translation device. None of them had. That had been made clear in the invitation letter, which was not really an invitation. Sloane Mercer sat at the far end of the row. She had said almost nothing since they left the transport ship. She watched everything with the quiet patience of someone who had already read the ending and was just waiting for the rest of the room to catch up. The Veth arbiter entered from a high door on the left platform. Its name was Sorath Vel. It was tall and gray and moved with the slow, deliberate weight of something that had never once been rushed by anything. 6 other representatives followed it and took their seats above the humans without looking down. Sorath Vel began to speak. The sound of the Veth language filled the hall like water filling a bowl, low and layered, with tones that moved under each other. Nora's pen moved faster. Her face was still, but her jaw had tightened just slightly, in the way it did when she was hearing something she did not want to translate. Cole watched Sorath Vel. He did not watch Nora. The speech lasted 14 minutes. It was formal and long and built the way certain buildings are built, not to shelter anything but to impress. Sorath Vel spoke of the Veth Dominion's history, 4 centuries of order, 47 species brought into membership. A galaxy made stable through reason and structure and the careful management of things that might otherwise cause damage. Then it spoke of Earth. Cole did not understand the words, but he understood the room. He understood the posture of the representatives above him, the slight angle of their bodies, the way Sorath Vel's eyes moved across the human delegation, the way eyes move across something that needs to be dealt with. When Sorath Vel finished, there was a short silence. Then one of the other representatives activated a translation panel. A flat, mechanical voice spoke in English, reading from the official record. Earth's provisional membership in the Galactic Dominion was hereby revoked. The grounds were listed as biological instability, documented behavioral volatility, and, the translation panel paused here, the processing. Insufficient development of reasoning capacity. Insufficient development of reasoning capacity. Nora stopped writing. Cole looked at the notepad in front of him. He had not written anything in it. He picked up his pen and put it down again. Then he raised his hand in the formal way, the way the pre-session briefing had instructed, and waited to be recognized. Sorath Vel looked at him with the patient expression of something that has not been surprised in a very long time. Cole asked, in a voice that was flat and easy, whether the declaration was binding or advisory. Sorath Vel said it was binding. Cole said, "That's a shame." He closed his folder. He folded his hands on top of it. He did not say anything else. Sorath Vel gave a short nod that meant the session was over. But the Veth representatives stood and filed out through the high door. None of them looked back. The hall began to empty. Somewhere above, the cool lighting stayed on, indifferent. Nora did not stand up immediately. She sat with her notepad on her knee and looked at what she had written. Cole came and stood beside her without speaking. She had translated the whole speech, every word, margin to margin on the page, and at the bottom she had written the specific phrase Sorath Vel had used for the grounds of Earth's revocation. Not the official translation the panel had given, the real one. In Veth taxonomy, the word used for insufficient reasoning capacity was the same word used for kept animals. Not wild ones, not dangerous ones, kept ones, things in enclosures, and things that were fed and monitored and moved from place to place by something smarter. She showed it to Cole. He read it once. He handed it back. "You understood that in the room," he said. It was not a question. "Yes," she said. He nodded slowly. He looked at the drainage channels in the floor, then at the seats above, then at the empty hall around them. He picked up his folder. "Let's go," he said. They walked out through the lower door, which was narrower than the doors above. Outside, the corridor was long and plain. The other members of the delegation were already moving toward the transport bay. Sloane was at the back of the group, not hurrying. Cole fell into step beside her. She said, without looking at him, "I'm going to send a message home." He said, "Keep it short." She said, "It'll be 2 words." He did not ask what they were. On the transport back, no one talked much. Nora sat by the window and looked at nothing in particular. The star outside was the wrong color for Earth. Too blue, too cold. She had spent 30 years learning to talk to species that did not look like her, did not think like her, did not breathe the same air. She had learned 41 separate languages. She had sat in rooms where no one expected her to understand and understood every word. She had been patient. She had been careful. She had built something slowly, the way people build things they believe in. One word at a time, one conversation at a time, for decades. And today, a creature in a high seat had called her species a kept animal, in her own language, right in front of her face. She looked at her notepad. She closed it. 18 minutes after the session ended, Sloane Mercer sent a message back to Earth. It contained the full transcript of the revocation and 2 words she added herself at the bottom. They said it. Earth's military frequencies, political channels, and public networks were all running normal traffic when the message arrived. Then, over the following 2 hours, they went quiet. Not offline, not shut down, just quiet. Routine, unremarkable, the kind of traffic that meant nothing was happening. The Veth intelligence analyst who monitored Earth's communication patterns filed a report that evening. In it, and she noted the drop in activity and classified it as early-stage demoralization, passive withdrawal, predictable behavior from a species that had just received a shock it had no framework to process. She marked it low priority. She had never studied what humans looked like when they had already decided something. She had never studied the difference between a species that goes quiet because it is broken and a species that goes quiet because it is done talking. There is a difference. It matters enormously. They broke the oldest rule in the galaxy: never challenge humans. Sloane Mercer had a hard drive she had never shown anyone. She had built it over 3 years, quietly, in the hours between her official work and sleep, in the way people build things they hope will never be necessary. It had maps on it, infrastructure diagrams. In supply route data for every Veth resupply node within 40 light-years of Earth's territorial boundary, communication relay positions, fuel depot locations, the specific rotation schedules of Veth patrol ships in the outer corridors. She had not built it because she expected a war. She had built it because gaps in knowledge felt to her like open wounds, and she could not stand the feeling of not knowing what was around her in the dark. She carried the drive to Admiral Ray Decker's office on a Tuesday morning and put it on his desk without saying anything first. Decker was 63 years old and had the face of a man who had been told bad news so many times that bad news no longer surprised him, only tired him. He looked at the drive. He looked at Sloane. He picked it up. He spent 40 minutes going through it. Sloane stood by the window and watched the city below. When he was done, he set the drive flat on the desk and was quiet for a moment. "Does Nora know about this?" he said. "Nora built half of it," Sloan said. Decker nodded slowly. He looked at the drive again. He said, "When did you start?" 3 years ago, she said, after the first time the Veth denied our deep space survey application without a reason. You thought it would come to this? I thought it might. I hoped it wouldn't." He was quiet again. Outside the window, a transport moved across the gray morning sky, slow and steady, going somewhere ordinary. Decker watched it. Then he said, "I'm going to make some calls." He said it the way people say things when they have already decided what the calls will lead to and are just telling you out of courtesy. Sloan picked up her coat. "I know," she said. She left the drive on his desk. 3 days later, Captain Mara Voss received a data packet at her station aboard the Resolute. It was not an order. It was described in the header as a theoretical exercise, a logistics problem submitted for officer evaluation purposes. The problem asked, given 12 ships of mixed class, how would you move them from their current positions to a corridor 40 light-years out without the movement appearing on long-range Veth sensor grids? Mara read it twice. Then she smiled. She did not smile often. When she did, it meant she had found something interesting. She spread the star charts across her console and started working. She worked the way she always worked, in silence, with total focus. And treating the problem like a piece of architecture that needed to be not just functional, but clean. She did not like solutions that were merely correct. She liked solutions that were elegant. There was a difference. Correct meant it worked. Elegant meant nothing was wasted. Elegant meant the problem itself looked foolish after you were done with it. 4 hours later, she sent her solution back with a single line at the bottom. Beautiful. When do we go? The answer came 9 days later. It was a training exercise schedule. Technically. Lieutenant Eli Pruitt got his reassignment orders on a Wednesday. No explanation was given, which was normal for reassignments that were not normal at all. He was told to report to the Resolute and take up an administrative coordination post. Eli was 26 years old from Atlanta, and he had joined the fleet because he was good at noticing things and writing them down, which was not the most dramatic reason to join the military, but turned out to be more useful than most people expected. He found Commander Cole Hargrove on the bridge his first morning and waited to be told what his actual job was. Cole looked at him for a moment. Then he said, in 17 words exactly, "Watch what happens on this ship and write it down. Not in the system. In that." He pointed at the notepad Eli was holding. Eli looked at his notepad. He looked at Cole. "Why not in the system?" he said. Cole said, "Because some things shouldn't be in systems that anyone else can read." Eli wrote that down. Cole watched him do it and said nothing. Meanwhile, the Veth Intelligence Division had begun to notice small things. A refueling platform near the Kepler Belt went offline for scheduled maintenance. A standard shipping corridor was rerouted around a new debris field. 3 Earth research vessels filed for extended deep space survey missions. A training exercise involving 12 mixed-class ships was registered with the Fleet Authority. Individually, each of these things was ordinary. The analyst assigned to monitor Earth's activity logged them all separately, in different files, under different categories. On the 14th day, she noticed that the maintenance window, the rerouting, the survey missions, and the exercise had all been filed within a 6-day period. She put them in the same file. She looked at them together for a while. She wrote a report with the word pattern in the subject line and sent it to her supervisor. The report sat in a queue. The night before the Resolute was scheduled to depart, Cole found Nora in the observation corridor, a narrow passage with one long reinforced window bolted to the ship's outer hull. It was not really an observation deck. Someone had just put a bench there years ago and the name had stuck. The view was good. That was all it had going for it. Nora was sitting on the bench looking out at the dark. Cole sat beside her. They had known each other for 11 years. They did not need to fill silences with each other. After a while, she said, "They used the animal word, Cole." Her voice was steady. "The word the Veth use for things that live in enclosures, things that are managed. I've been studying their language for 30 years, and I know every shade of what that word means. And they used it for us." Cole said nothing. She said, "I've spent my whole career trying to build something between us and them, trying to get them to actually see us. And they sat in that room and called us livestock." He said, "I know." She said, "I want them to understand what they said. I don't want them afraid. I don't want them hurt. I want them to understand." He said, "That's the plan." She looked out the window. The stars outside were dense and cold and very far away. She had memorized more alien words than any living human. She had sat across from creatures that had more arms than she had fingers and talked to them about philosophy and history and loss. She was not a soldier. She was not someone who understood wars in the way Cole and Mara understood them, as geometry, as problems to be solved with movement and timing. But she understood what the Veth had done, and she understood that what was about to happen was not cruelty. It was not rage. It was something much older and much harder to explain. The response of a species that had been patient for a very long time and had finally been given a reason to stop being patient. At 0300 station time, the 12 ships blinked off Veth sensor grids simultaneously. Not because they had been jammed, not because of any failure in the Veth system, because Mara Voss had mapped every sensor coverage gap in the relevant corridor and routed the fleet through the spaces between them, one at a time, like threading 12 needles in the dark. The Veth analyst's report, the one with pattern in the subject line, reached her supervisor's desk 4 hours later. And by then the fleet was already gone. They broke the oldest rule. In the galaxy, never challenge humans. The Kepler relay station was unmanned. That was not an accident. Cole had been very specific about that when he gave Mara her first target. No people, no occupied outposts, no ships with crews on them. He had said it once, clearly, and Mara had nodded and moved on without discussion because she had already arrived at the same conclusion on her own. This was not going to be a war. It was going to be a lesson. And the first rule of a good lesson was that you did not hurt people before they had understood what they were being taught. The relay station hung in the dark between two dim stars, a cluster of gray metal arms and antenna towers and blinking signal lights. It fed communication data to 6 other Veth relay nodes in the region. And those nodes fed data to 40 more. The whole network was built on a design philosophy the Veth called passive redundancy. The idea that many small nodes, spread wide, could never be fully disrupted because there was no single point of failure. Mara had read the design philosophy document 3 times. She had found it in Sloane's archive. "Passive redundancy is not resilience," she said, standing at her console with a star chart spread across 2 screens. "It's just fragility spread thin." She traced the relay connections with 1 finger, showing Cole how each node depended on its neighbors. "You take this one, the signal has to reroute. You take these 2 at the same time, the reroute path collapses. You take these 3 in this order." She paused and looked at him. "The whole regional network goes blind." Cole looked at the chart. "And how long?" 11 minutes, she said. Then, after a beat, "Beautiful problem." He almost smiled. Almost. The approach took 2 hours. The Resolute moved through the gap Mara had mapped, with the other 11 ships holding positions further back. No one fired anything. No weapons were armed. What they did instead was technical. A series of specific signal pulses aimed at the station's communication hardware, precisely calibrated to overload the relay buffers without leaving marks. Clean, quiet. The kind of work that took months to plan and minutes to do. At 11 minutes and 4 seconds, the Kepler relay station went dark. 6 nodes went dark with it. Then, cascading slowly outward over the following hour, 14 more. Eli wrote everything down. He wrote down what the screen showed, what Mara said, what Cole did not say. And he wrote down the exact time of each event, the sequence of lights going out on the regional map, the way the bridge crew moved and spoke and did not celebrate. He wrote, "Nobody cheered. I thought someone would cheer. Nobody did. It felt more like surgery than anything else." He paused and looked at that sentence. He left it. The Veth response came faster than expected. Sorathvel received the damage report within 2 hours of the relay going dark and convened an emergency session of the Dominion's Military Council. The council voted quickly and without much debate because what had happened was clear and the proper response was clear, and the Veth had always been efficient when they knew what category a problem belonged to. 3 destroyers were dispatched. Their orders were to locate the Earth vessels responsible, establish contact, and if contact was refused, disable and detain. The fleet commander assigned to lead the response was a Drath, one of the oldest member species of the Dominion, experienced in exactly this kind of enforcement operation. The Drath had been conducting military operations for 300 years. Their tactics were well documented, their capabilities well understood. The Drath commander reviewed the technical profiles of Earth's known fleet and made a clean, reasonable assessment. The humans were outmatched. The profiles he reviewed were 6 years old. He did not know they were 6 years old. Nobody had told him. Nobody on the Veth intelligence side had flagged the gap because it had not seemed like a relevant gap. Earth was a provisional member species. Its fleet was small, its ships were not a priority for ongoing technical assessment. And the Drath commander moved his 3 destroyers into the region and began a standard search pattern. Mara watched him do it. She had been watching the Drath tactical movement patterns for 2 days, since Sloane's archive had given her their documented response protocols. She had read them the way she read everything, carefully, completely, looking for the geometry underneath the strategy. Every military doctrine had a geometry. The Veth doctrine was strong, solid, well-tested. It worked very well against opponents who behaved like opponents were supposed to behave. It did not account for opponents who had read the doctrine. The engagement, when it happened, was short and extremely unpleasant for the Drath commander. It was not short because the Resolute was more powerful than the Drath destroyers. But it was short because Mara had placed the Resolute in the one position that the Drath tactical model classified as tactically illogical, a tight angle off the 3rd destroyer's rear sensor arc, too close for effective targeting, too awkward for standard maneuvering. The geometry was uncomfortable. The position made no conventional sense. Mara loved positions that made no conventional sense. The Drath commander could not bring his weapons to bear effectively without moving in ways that exposed his other 2 ships. When he moved, the Resolute moved with him, staying in the illogical position, patient and stubborn. Meanwhile, the other 11 Earth ships, which the Drath commander had plotted as holding at safe distance, were no longer where his charts said they were. They had moved while he was focused on the Resolute, and he was a good commander. He recognized within 4 minutes of the engagement starting that he had made a fundamental error in his model of the situation. He was not outgunned. He was outmapped. There is a difference, and the difference matters, and the difference was 4 minutes too late to be useful. 2 of his destroyers retreated. The 3rd, his own ship, took damage to its propulsion and went still. Cole gave the order to stop firing. The Drath ship floated. Its lights were still on. Its crew was alive. Cole opened a channel. He said in flat English that was being translated by the Drath ship's own systems. "You will report what you saw today. Report it accurately." Then he closed the channel. Mara looked at him. She said, "You're letting them go." He said, "That's the point." She thought about that. She nodded slowly. It's with the expression of someone who had just been shown a solution more elegant than the one she would have chosen. On his bench in the corridor outside the bridge, Eli Pruitt wrote for 20 minutes without stopping. His hand moved fast across the notepad, keeping up with what his brain was trying to say. He was writing about the way Mara had moved the ship, the way she spoke to it in a low, quick voice, small adjustments, small corrections, like a conversation with something she understood completely. He was writing about Cole standing at the center of the bridge without raising his voice once during the whole engagement. He wrote, "I think this is what my grandfather was talking about." He did not explain what his grandfather had said. He turned the page and kept going. On the Dominion station, the Sorath Vel received the Drath After Action report and read it twice. Then it sat very still for a long time. It asked the elder advisor, the one from the species that had encountered Earth 80 years ago and quietly decided to stay very far away after that, what the report meant. The elder said, "It means they are not finished." Sorath Vel said, "What do they want?" The elder was quiet for a moment. Then it said, "That is the wrong question." Sorath Vel looked at it. The elder said, "The question you need to ask is different." It did not say what the different question was. It let Sorath Vel sit with the silence and find its own way to it. That is also a kind of lesson they broke the oldest rule in the galaxy: never challenge humans. The message came through Nora's personal channel, which meant it was not a military communication. It was routed through a back channel that the Dominion's diplomatic office used for conversations that were not supposed to be official yet. The kind of communication that allowed both sides to say things before those things became part of a formal record. Nora had used the channel before, years ago when she was working on early contact frameworks. She had not expected to use it again. The message asked, in careful and slightly imperfect English, whether she would be willing to speak. Not Earth's government, not the fleet. Her, specifically. Nora Callahan, xenolinguist. The one who had been in the room at Vel Korath. The one they had not given a translation device. She read the message twice. Then she went and found Cole. He read it once. He stood quietly for a moment. In the way he stood when he was thinking hard about something he did not want to think hard about. Then he said, "You don't have to do this." "I know," she said. He said, "You can end it at any time." "I know that too," he said. "Nora," she said. "Cole, I have spent 30 years waiting for someone to actually listen. Let me talk." He stepped back. He gave her the room. She accepted the communication. The channel opened with a brief silence on both sides. Then Sorath Vel's voice came through the translator. Its own translator this time, which it was using. That was new. That was notable. The voice was lower and slower than she remembered from the hall at Vel Korath. It did not sound like a creature conducting a formal session. It sounded, as much as anything from the Veth could sound like anything human, like something that was not sure where to start. It asked her how she was. Nora said she was fine. There was a pause. Then Sorath Vel said, working carefully through the translator, "We have reviewed the events of the past weeks, the damage to our relay network, the engagement with our Drath fleet. We have reviewed the data and the reports, and we have run calculations." Another pause. "We do not understand the conclusion we arrived at." Nora said, "What conclusion is that?" Sorath Vel said, "You could have destroyed the destroyers. Our data shows this clearly. The Earth vessels had the capability and the position. Commander Hargrove gave the order to stop. We do not understand why." Nora said, "I think you do understand why. I think you're asking me to confirm it." A longer silence. She said, "You're asking why we stopped." Sorath Vel said, "Yes." Nora leaned forward slightly. She said, "Because we chose to. Not because we were afraid of what you would do in response. We have run the same calculations you have, and we know what the full answer looks like. And we chose not to use it. We stopped because stopping was a decision, not a limitation. She let that sit for a moment. Then she said, "We stopped because we are not trying to destroy you. We are trying to make you understand what you said to us." The silence on the other end stretched long enough that Nora checked to make sure the channel was still open. It was. She waited. Sorath Vel said, "The formal revocation was a legal process. It was conducted according to Dominion protocol." Nora said, "I'm not talking about the revocation." Another silence. And she said, "I'm talking about the word you used." She did not ask if it knew which word. She could tell from the silence that it knew. She said, "I want to tell you something about that word, not what it translates to in English. You already know that. I want to tell you what it means." She paused. "Can I do that?" Sorath Vel said, "Yes." Nora had not prepared notes. She had spent 30 years carrying this in her head, and it did not need notes. She began with the word's origin, where it first appeared in Veth linguistic history, 800 years ago, what species it was first used to describe. A species that had contacted the Veth at a point in their development that the Veth considered primitive. The Veth had applied the word and managed that species accordingly, given them boundaries, monitored their growth. I decided what they were and were not ready for. The species had lived inside those decisions for 200 years. They were still living inside them. They had not reached the stars. Nora said, "They don't know what they might have become." The word was used, and the word became a management policy, and the policy became a ceiling, and what was under the ceiling was never allowed to find out what it was. Her voice stayed flat and even. That is what that word does. It does not just describe something, it decides something. It says, "We have measured you, and we have found you insufficient, and we will manage you accordingly." She stopped. She said, "And you used it for us." Sorath Vel said nothing. She said, "I want to be clear. I'm not asking you to be afraid of us. I'm not asking you to apologize because I need you to feel bad. And I am asking you to understand what you said. Because you said it to a species that has survived everything. We have survived diseases that killed half our population. We have survived wars that destroyed our own cities. We have survived our own worst impulses over and over for 10,000 years. And we kept going. And we kept reaching." She paused. "And then we reached you. And the first thing you did, when you finally had a reason to address us formally, was call us livestock." The silence after that was different from the other silences. Nora felt it in the channel the way you feel a change in pressure before weather comes. Sorath Vel said, "We did not intend." She said, "I know. That is also part of what I'm trying to tell you." She let that sit. She said, "You used the word without thinking about what it meant. That is the most honest thing about what happened. You looked at us and reached for the nearest category, and that category was managed things, things that are not yet ready, things that need a ceiling." She exhaled slowly. "And that tells me more about how you see the galaxy than anything else you could have said in that room." The channel was quiet for a long time. When Sorath Vel spoke again, it used a form of address that Nora had only read about in old linguistic records. A grammatical construction the Veth reserved for communications between equals of long standing. It had never been used in a formal context with a provisional member species. It had never been used with Earth. What it said, translated as carefully as Nora could manage, was something close to an acknowledgement. Not an apology. The Veth language had a separate construction for apology, and it was not that one. This was something older and more complicated. It was the grammatical form the Veth used for errors that could not be undone, only recognized, only held. Nora closed the channel. She sat in the small communications room of the Resolute with her hands folded on the table. The screens around her ran normal data. The ship hummed with its ordinary sounds. Somewhere down the corridor, she could hear the faint noise of the crew doing what crews do, moving, working, living. She sat very still. 30 years, 41 languages, thousands of hours in rooms where she was the only human and the only thing between Earth and a misunderstanding that could have ended badly. She had been patient. She had been careful. She had believed, and with the specific stubbornness of people who choose to believe in things that are hard to believe in, that if she worked long enough and listened well enough, someone on the other side would eventually actually hear her. She did not cry. She was not built for crying in communications rooms on military ships. She said very quietly, to the empty room, to 30 years of work that had just arrived somewhere neither terrible nor triumphant, but simply, finally, real. Okay. Just that word. Just the one. Then she stood up, straightened her jacket, and went to find Cole. They broke the oldest rule in the galaxy: never challenge humans. 6 months later, the hearing was scheduled. It was not called a readmission hearing. The Dominion's administrative office had given it a longer, more formal title that meant roughly a review of provisional status conditions in light of updated assessment data. What it actually was, stripped of the formal language, was the Veth's way of correcting a mistake without using the word mistake. Nora read the title on the official document and let out a short breath through her nose that was not quite a laugh. Cole picked up his dress uniform from the Resolute's quartermaster on the morning they were scheduled to depart for Vel-Korath. He had not worn it since the first hearing. He put it on, looked at himself in the small mirror above the sink in his quarters, and decided he looked more or less the same as before. He went to the bridge. Mara was already there, which was not surprising. Mara was always there. She was looking at a star chart the way some people look at things they love, with full attention and no performance of it. He said, "Ready?" She said, "Ready was 6 months ago. This is just paperwork." He smiled at that. A real one, not the almost smile she usually got from him. Eli was in the corridor with his notepad. He had started his third one 2 weeks ago. He was not sure how many he would fill before this was over, or if it was over, or what over meant for something like this. He had started writing the date on every page, which he had not done at first. He thought the dates might matter later. The transport to Vel-Korath took 4 hours. Nobody talked much. Nora sat in the same seat she had occupied on the way back from the first hearing, by the window with the wrong-colored star outside. The star was the same. She had the same notepad, though she had filled it and started a new one since then. She did not open it now. She looked out the window. She had worn the same dress uniform as the first hearing. Cole had not commented on this. He did not need to. The hall at Vel-Korath was the same as before. The ceiling still went up 40 meters. The Veth seats were still raised near the top. The human delegation's seats were still at the bottom level, and the drainage channels were still cut into the floor beside them. Nora sat down and looked at the drainage channels. She looked at them for a long moment. Then she looked up at the high seats, and then she looked at the empty space of the room itself. All that engineered height, all that deliberate scale, all those meters of stone built to make things below them feel small. She did not feel small. That was the difference. The session lasted 22 minutes. Sorath Vel was present, seated at the top of the left platform as before. It did not make a speech. The formal vote was read by a junior official in plain, procedural language. Earth's provisional membership was confirmed and its status changed to full observer standing, pending a review period of 12 months. The vote was unanimous. Nobody cheered. Eli wrote down, "Nobody cheered here either. I'm starting to think that's a human thing. When it actually matters, we go quiet." On the transport home, Sloane Mercer opened her tablet and checked a message from a source she would not name in any official record. She read it twice. Then she crossed the transport and sat beside Nora and handed her the tablet without saying anything. Nora read the message. The Dominion's Council had, in a private session 2 weeks before the hearing, voted to add a new provision to its foundational charter. The provision was to be written in all 47 member languages and filed in the Dominion's core legal record, where the founding rules of the Galactic Order were kept, the ones that did not change, the ones that had been considered too obvious to write down until apparently they were not obvious enough. The provision read, in its most direct translation, "No member body shall issue formal challenge to a species that has survived its own extinction period. The consequences of violation would be borne in full by the violating party. No protection from response, no diplomatic mediation until the violated species requested it." An Earth's name did not appear anywhere in the document. It didn't need to. Nora handed the tablet back to Sloane. She looked out the window for a moment. Then she said, "Who named it? In the official record, who proposed it for the charter?" Sloane said, "The Elder Advisor, the one from the species that pulled back from Earth 80 years ago." Nora said, "They've known since then?" Sloane said, "I think they've known for longer than that." Nora nodded slowly. Outside, the stars moved past the window in long, slow streaks of cold light. She watched them and thought about the Elder Advisor, a creature from a species old enough to remember what the galaxy had looked like before the Dominion existed, old enough to have watched other young species pushed down under the management word, the sealing word, and the word that said, "We have decided what you are." Old enough to know that some species, when pushed down hard enough and long enough, did not break under the weight. They pushed back up through it, slow and unstoppable, the way certain things grow through stone. The Resolute docked 3 hours later. Cole and Mara found the ship's mess and sat across from each other with coffee. Mara had a star chart on the table. She always had a star chart somewhere. She was tracing a route with her finger into deep space, past the current Dominion boundary. Cole watched her do it. He said, "You're already thinking about what comes next." She said, "Someone will push again, somewhere, someone always does." He said, "Probably." She said, "Good." She said it the way she said beautiful about a clean tactical solution. And not because she wanted trouble, because she was a person who was built for hard problems and who had made peace with that about herself a long time ago. He drank his coffee. She traced another route. Eli sat in his corridor with the third notepad open on his knee. He turned back through the pages, all the dates, all the observations, the messy shorthand from the engagement, the things Nora had said, the things Cole had not said, the way the hall at Vel Korath felt different on the second visit, even though nothing about the room had changed. He read his own sentence from months ago. "I think this is what my grandfather was talking about." He still hadn't written what his grandfather had said. He still didn't need to. He opened to a fresh page. He wrote the date at the top. And he held the pen over the blank space below it and thought about what to put there. What single line could hold the whole shape of what had happened over the past 6 months? The insult, the silence, the careful work, the 11-minute relay, the Drath who were let go on purpose, the word Nora had taken apart in a communications room while Cole watched a feed he was definitely not watching. He wrote, "They said the rule out loud, so we made them write it down." He looked at that. He closed the notepad. In Chicago, 1 week after the hearing, Nora Callahan was at her kitchen table before dawn, with a cup of tea gone cold and a Veth philosophical text open in front of her. It was a dense, old document, full of layered meanings that did not translate cleanly into any human language. Nobody had asked her to translate it. Nobody would probably read the translation when she finished it. She had been working on it for 3 years in the hours when she was not doing other things, because the gaps in understanding felt to her like open wounds, and because she was, at her core, a person who could not leave a hard thing alone. She picked up her pen. She found her place. She worked. Outside, Chicago moved through its early morning the way old cities do. Slowly, steadily, with the deep, unsentimental energy of a place that has been through everything and kept going anyway. Traffic built. Light changed. The ordinary world continued in all its stubborn, ongoing noise. Inside, Nora wrote one word in the margin, then another, then crossed out the second and tried again. She frowned at the page. She wrote a third option. She had spent her whole life learning to say things that were hard to say. She was not done yet. She was nowhere near done yet. She turned the page.